Welcome to Local is Lekker, where we look for lekker stories about local businesses. And today I'm not even 5 minutes from our home visiting Jay Smit in his man cave. You explained earlier that fishing might be one of the biggest sports in the world.
I think turnover-wise it is, when you start taking into account the boats that people buy and the vehicles to tow them and all that. But every man fishes, from subsistence fishermen through to the really wealthy. The best fishermen spend millions on their boats and rigs. And fly fishing forms a tiny part of this worldwide fishing thing.
People that tie their own flies makes an even smaller part of it.
Yeah, and then of the people who fly fish, a very small proportion tie their own flies. And of those that tie their own flies, very few of them are top end and will sort of buy the type of equipment that I manufacture.
Yeah, so it's very specialized, but it's very interesting, and for me it's obviously interesting because it's local. So we're going to take a little bit of a dive into Jay's world, how he started this business, and and why it is interesting.
This is my happy place. This is where I spend most of my time, in Jay's man cave. A lot of my friends say I don't have a man cave, I have a man house. But yeah, if you look at, this is a lifetime's collection of tools, which I started when I was back in the army. All my overtime pay for my whole career was spent on buying tools. I'm mad about tools, good quality tools, and it makes doing this job that much more pleasant and rewarding. My dad was a great shad fisherman. We made our own spoons, and growing up on the farm I was into DIY. We made things and fixed things ourselves on the farm, and so from an early age I was creating and making stuff. And then when I got hooked on fly fishing, fly tying appealed to me right from the word go. You were creating something, and something really varied, because I'm interested in all types of fishing. Saltwater fly fishing, for example, in Costa Rica we were fishing for tarpon, and we were using flies, huge flies like this, tied on 6/0 and 8/0 hooks. And when you get into trout fishing, you're doing these really tiny little dry flies and things. And we've got a lot of bass. This is a little mouse pattern we use for bass fishing. Trout even take them. Here's another fly. It works really well for bass in the fresh waters in the Midlands here. And the old beetle pattern that we use on Sterkfontein for yellowfish. Extremely good fly. We normally tie them black, but this is one of the tan ones that the old Dr. Hans ties. So fly tying is very varied, from the really tiny flies to huge big flies for saltwater species. I've got customers who tie flies for marlin, and yet it's a tiny sport. There's a lot of fishermen in the world, but a very few of those actually fly fish, and of the fly fishermen, very few of those actually get into tying, and especially top end tying. So when I got into this fly tying thing, I bought a cheap vise, and it didn't work so well. Hooks kept popping out as I just finished a nice fly, and I disappeared into my workshop. It wasn't as complete as it is today, and I made the first Jvice, which was later to become a Jvice, and by version 3 I had a vise that worked for me. I joined the Durban Fly Tyers, and very soon people wanted one, and I said, this is not going to happen quickly. After a few years, once I'd got into fly fishing and tying reasonable flies that I was catching my own fish on, and let me tell you that catching a fish on a fly you've tied yourself is really, really satisfying. And especially when we go on fishing trips, take the kit along, tie in the cabin in the evening with a few whiskies, and the next day go out with those flies and catch fish is really, really satisfying and something I'd enjoy tremendously. Back in the day when fly tying first began, flies were tied in the hand, and there's still some famous fly tyers who still practice this art, but very, very few people do it. Basically, you're holding the hook in your hand, you're adding the material, and then you're winding it up and tying the flies. But as you can imagine, that's very difficult. Your fingers get tired, and now you've got to put this thing down while you prepare the next feather or material. And this is where fly tying vices were invented in the early parts of last century. And basically it is a device for holding a hook. The hook goes in there and it gets clamped. So now one can rotate this hook, you can hold in materials, and you can proceed to tie your fly. Soon after I was into fly fishing and I could cast well enough, I booked a trip with Ben Pretorius down to the Mtentu River with his fudu, and it was an amazing week for me to mix with him, who's a professional fisherman. I learnt a lot, and in the Mtentu estuary the kingfish come up, and we had perfect weather, perfect conditions, and these kingfish come cruising up the river. It looks like a wake. There's no boat, but it looks like a wake coming up. And I was fortunate enough to catch a couple of nice kingfish on that trip. And in the evenings we sat and tied flies, and Ben showed us what worked and what feathers to do, and that was all part and parcel of the trip. Ben had never seen a Jvice before, and he looked at my Jvice and he said, "Nah, that thing you must make. You must manufacture it. I want to sell that." And I said, "No, Ben, 80 hours of work, I don't think it's going to happen." Anyway, I became friends with Ben, and over the next few years he bullied me into finally making a plan. These are the first two brass vices. There are prototype vices that I was happy with, that I used in the early days before I started manufacturing. And the blue vice behind it, that was the original Jvice, of which 100 were produced, 100 parts by my supplier, which I then marketed on my website and sold. I had to lay out quite a bit of money to get these first 100 done. The supplier wouldn't do less than 100 parts. So I dug deep, and these first 100 vices were produced. It was the supplier's idea to have them in different colors. So there were some black, some blue, and some red. And they turned out to be so popular, I had to carry on with the colors because people kept asking for them for some reason. It doesn't improve your fly tying, but it does. It's something different that a lot of other manufacturers didn't have. When those 100 were nearly all sold, it took about 2 years, and I came to reorder. Suddenly the price had gone up 5-fold. And my supplier, and I said, "How can this be?" And my supplier said, "No, but this is a very intricate part. I totally misjudged it when I gave you the first quote." And I had to push up my price from 1,200 Rand a set to just under 2,000 Rand a set. And he agreed to do me another 50 vices at the new price. But I realized at this stage that I couldn't carry on like this. Next time it would be more. And roughly about this time, the company that I worked for shut down. I was retrenched, and I took my package and bought a CNC vice cum milling machine combination so that I could manufacture my own Jvice. A CNC machine is a computer numerically controlled lathe in effect, and by writing programs you can control the tool path that cuts the various shapes and sizes into the parts. Typically I would set up for one part here and make 500 to 1,000 depending on how many of them were used in the vice, and then store them, clean them and store them for later use, and then the next part would be set up. This is the working heart of the machine. It's got some static tools, different cutting tools that can shape a bar that is being held in the jaw there. It can then index and cross drill and tap with various tools on the side. And this machine was chosen was specific. It had the specific requirements that worked well with my design. It was imported specially for me. It was one of the first early ones in South Africa. This is the head for the tube fly attachment. It's one of the parts. I would set up for this and spend a couple of days making just these, and then clean them and bag them for later use. I always get asked if I have shares in Makita. I had to standardize on one type of drill because otherwise you have so many different types of batteries, you've got to have different charges for them all. And people say, why so many? Well, I love collecting tools. I've collected tools my whole life. But the reason why so many is if I want an 8mm reamer, I've got an 8mm reamer. If I want a countersink bit, I've got a countersink bit. If I want a 10mm reamer, it's there. I don't have to sit and change tools, and it saves me a tremendous amount of time when I'm assembling and putting stuff together. One thing about the Jvice, the only part that is imported is the carry bag. It's not even imported, it's made by a company in Durban, and the little waste basket that catches all your cuttings is made by an old pensioner lady who lives in Margate, and she regularly sews up the little waste baskets for me. Everything else I make myself, including the wooden bases that you can see here with my trusty old combination machine. And I made a series of drilling machines for custom drilling various components, and for branding my logo on the back of the base. These are some pneumatic machines I built to custom drill parts of the base. These holes all used to get drilled one at a time on the early models. I'll do a demo here. It makes a bit of noise. So the little machine automatically clamps the part and drills 5 holes at a time, and then the next five holes. Okay, if you want some noise. This pin locates with a pre-drilled 15mm hole. And then the orientation between the vice stem and the cam locking system is precise in all cases. To demonstrate how this works, there's a cam that fits in the larger hole, and then the stem of the vice goes in there, and that gets clamped there, and it's a sturdy connection between the vice stem and the wooden base, and it's very quick release for packing away. The same cam is used here for storage to hold it all in place. There are about 30 parts in just the basic vice, excluding all the parts that go into things like the spinners for making brushes that are part of the kit. This is a brush making system that fits onto the base, so that brushes can be made for tying the large brush flies that are so popular today. The reason for the pedestal being as big as it is, and why it is this size and this concept, it's basically was designed to fit in a laptop. But in my early days of fly tying, I didn't want to go and lock myself away in a study somewhere while my wife and daughters sat and watched TV. So I designed it to be a laptop system. The vise is quickly assembled in the on the lap, and I could merrily tie flies while they were watching TV, and I was still part of the conversation. I'll go through some of the features of the Jvice. The jaw is a 3-stage cam. It has coarse for dropping the fly, medium and fine for the final clamp. When setting the hook, the side screw is adjusted till it holds, and then it's clamped. And it's as simple as, sorry, I just slight more pressure there, and there you have it rotating on center. The gooseneck came about later, and it is really a nice feature because one can hold material in place while tying and observing those first critical stages when a tail, for example, is tied in. And the vise can be rotated about 180 degrees without taking your hand off the material or off the hook. The positioning of the vise is a friction control. It can be stopped in any position just with a quick twist of the thumb, or you can set it in one position and it'll more or less stay where you want it. The gooseneck is an excellent steady for us older gentlemen who start shaking a bit, especially after a few whiskies. It really steadies you down when you're putting materials in. Any other conventional vise, if you're doing that, there's no ways you can turn the vise to see where the material is, and although it does steady you, it's not as comfortable as getting in behind the hook like that. Just a little bit about the J bobbin I manufacture. It's a bobbin where the thread tension can be adjusted on the fly. It fits comfortably in the hand, and while you're tying you can adjust the thread tension. The reason for the odd angle is that it makes tying more comfortable. Instead of tying with your elbow up, which can get really tiresome, you're tying in a more relaxed position, and the thread can be adjusted, the tension can be adjusted as required, looser, tighter. One of the other features of the Jvice is its gallows attachment. It's only a simple piece of wire, but what's really nice about it is that it rotates with the vise. And most gallows attached to the side, they come over, they've got a spring that goes down and a clip on the end, and if you rotate the vise, it becomes a useless piece of equipment. Another one of the gadgets I make that attach to the vise is this little item called a hair packer, which was useful when spinning deer hair. Once deer hair has been spun, you pack the deer hair back. It keeps a spring tension on the hair, and the vise can be rotated. You put in a few turns to keep that hair in place before the next batch of deer hair is spun onto the hook. This is for making a bass bug or something in that line. One of the other features of the Jvice is they come with they can be ordered with a waste basket, and they're made out of parachute material. And I have a couple of customers that call them a marriage saver, because when you're trimming your deer hair or anything else, it ends up in there and not on the floor and on couches and things like that. So as simple as it is, it's just about a must-have with every fly tying vise. This is the Jvice brush maker for making brushes, for making big brush flies. The processes start with a very thin wire. We use the stainless wire, 0.003. And one starts by wrapping clockwise on that little peg that sticks out there, then going into the spring, giving it a few turns, and then resting the bobbin on the bobbin rest. The materials are added and laid up on top of the bottom wire. Put a few more in there. The bobbin then comes back over the top, and in the reverse direction it's secured on the tab, and the base is dropped away and the spinning begins. And as it spins, so it doesn't form a rope, one has to tease out the didn't lay this out as evenly as I should have, but the general idea is there. And then that is cut off with a pair of side cutters and used for tying brush flies. This is then typically tied onto a hook and wrapped around the hook to form the body of the saltwater pattern. Most vices come with a clamp and a vice and a rest. And then there's another clamp in the arsenal, which is a Caddy clamp. And this one is made on laser cut plates and spacers. It can be made to take any dimension that's required, and that just simply clamps on the edge of any existing desk. It's got a pin for the hackle plier and for various. I keep my Allen keys in there in my assembly station. And then we also have the under desk stand, which screws on under the edge of a desk. This one's very nice because no holes have to be drilled in the desk, and it's only secured underneath the lip of a table. And that's the other desk stand, which can be screwed to any table, tying station, or even a breadboard for making your own tying setup. In closing, I sell Jvice all over the world. I think our last count was like 53 countries I'd exported to. I have a simple DIY website, www.jvice.com, and that's how I can be contacted. My phone number, email, everything is on the website.